Welcome to the Adoptee Thoughts Podcast. I am your host, Melissa Guida-Richards, an author, adoptee, and mom. Each week, we will delve into the nuances of adoption, as well as tips for how to bring up difficult discussions in your adoptive family. And most importantly, we will not shy away from tough topics. So thanks for joining me today, and let's jump into your weekly dose of Adoptee Thoughts. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Maria Richmond, and I live in Houston, Texas.
And what kind of adoption was yours?
So mine was an international adoption, and it was also a transracial adoption. I was born in Quito, Ecuador, and I was adopted and brought to the United States.
I know you mentioned that you were adopted at 2, right?
Yes.
Do you remember anything around that age before you came to the United States?
I do not. I really wish that I had some sort of memory, but I don't. All of that is kind of that has not remained in my mind at all.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how your adoptive parents told you your story of adoption?
I don't remember the specific time because we don't look alike. They're white, and I am dark skinned. It was pretty obvious that we were different, but I can't remember like the specific time.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I remember that anytime I had some questions, um, my mother would tell me what she knew, what the nuns told her, and it was always there were so many holes, there just wasn't enough information that really satisfied me, but it just was pretty much, I was brought to the orphanage and my mother tried to care for me and that was about it.
Were you comfortable discussing adoption with your family?
Um, I remember, I remember I would ask some questions as I got older just because I began to really get interested in it, but there was never really a time where it was, like, awkward. It was more in the sense that they didn't have a lot of information, so it kinda was just like, what's the point of bringing it up because they can't fill any empty gaps. They've already told me what they know, and even then,
Mm-hmm.
over the years, some of that has changed just because,
Yeah.
they've gotten older and, their memory isn't that great.
When did you first realize that you were a different race than your family?
Well, I've always known that I was different because I look different. My mother, was fair-skinned,
Uh-huh.
and she was tall, and, she had straighter hair, and I kind of remember, looking at her, looking at my siblings, and just noticing that we were different, but I didn't it wasn't like as of a big deal as when I was younger as it was as I got older, and I just noticed that there was nothing to compare as far as, what we look like. Um So, it just I don't know, there was not, like, a specific time, that I can recall, a specific memory or any of that, that I just knew. I just remember whenever I asked questions, and that's when
Mm-hmm.
she said, she brought up my mother and the orphanage, and so it was just like I said, it was just kind of like an empty story, and
Yeah.
I just knew that I came from another woman somewhere else.
Did your parents try to incorporate your birth culture at all while you were growing up?
Unfortunately, no. And it really began to affect me as I got older and I moved out on my own and I had my first child. And my husband and I are really big on traditions. And I began to realize that I didn't have any traditions that I grew up with that were from my culture. I don't really know why they didn't. Um, I, I, I'd like to think that they didn't do it on purpose.
Mhm.
When I have some I have adoption folder and there's my home study in there, and I was looking at it a few months ago, and I noticed that the social worker had typed on the document that, my parents agreed to, incorporate my culture, back in the United States.
Mhm.
And it kind of stood out to me, and I was talking to my husband. I'm like, I don't remember any of that. I don't remember any culture being, an influence in my growing up, and I don't really know why. And I hope to ask my mother soon,
Mhm.
just because I mean, it's a pretty big part of my growing up, and to not have it and to try and incorporate it now, it's difficult.
Yeah. What year were you adopted in?
1987.
Okay, I was adopted in 93, and even then, I don't think there was as much information as there is now on the importance of incorporating culture. Not that that's an excuse at all, but I've noticed that a lot of adoptees that I've spoken with that were adopted before me or around the same time as me didn't have adoptive parents that often would try to make those extra steps that we now know are so important in the adoption community. So I totally understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I think, I was surrounded with a lot of love, and so I think that was, like, their focus,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't like I said, I don't think that it was done, like, maliciously, like, we're gonna, you know, whitewash this child or anything in that nature. It was just not like, it just wasn't thought of. And I really try and tell people who are trying to adopt or who ask questions. I always try and make sure that they know that exists and how important it is, because not many people do. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they think, "Oh, you can learn it now," and it's like, "Well, wait a second, like, but it's different.
It
It's different."
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know I just saw your post on Instagram about learning Spanish. And that just like made me have all the feels
Mm,
because I was brought up with Italian culture being the primary one in my family. And my parents, they spoke Italian, my grandparents, they spoke Italian. So like I was almost completely fluent at one point. But when I found out about my
mm,
adoption, like I kind of threw that away. And so I started to try to learn Spanish to get to know more about my birth roots, but it's just been such a difficult road for me to actually sit down and try to learn it because I just feel so embarrassed for not knowing. Like I feel like it's something that should be intrinsic almost.
oh yeah, definitely. It's a huge loss, and you're having to incorporate it back in your life after so many years, and it's just I don't know, sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter,
Mm,
trying to learn this language that is mine, yet it really isn't mine. So yeah, the journey to learning Spanish has been very emotional. I cried. We signed up for a Spanish class, and I cried signing up. I cried searching for the right, course to take, and it was, it was a bittersweet moment, and I almost was just like, "What am I doing? Like, this is just so traumatic
yeah.
that I don't know if I wanna open up this wound, and venture in there and see where it takes me."
And like native speakers and like people who have grown up with Spanish in their households, their response to me is just like, just learn it, like just watch telenovelas and, just use it in your day to day life.
Mhm.
But non adoptees, I feel like they don't understand, like you mentioned, like the trauma and the pain that comes with facing these things when we've been, well, I personally was whitewashed most of my life, so now learning about these things is very difficult.
Oh, yes. It is. It's hard to explain because it's gotta look like from the outside that you're just kind of crying and you're just whining about it. And so when
Mhm.
I explain it to people, I try and say, like, it's so much deeper than me just not knowing this language. Like, it was so traumatic growing up and people trying to talk to me, and I had to tell them I didn't speak Spanish. And then the older folks that spoke Spanish, I know they didn't believe me, and so I felt like I was disrespecting them. And so
Mhm.
it's not just like me trying to learn another language. It's from it's from years of not knowing it, and now I'm trying to learn it and hopefully feel authentic while I'm speaking it to people.
Mhm. It's like a part of reclaiming our identity
Oh, yes.
And as adoptees, especially intercountry adoptees, like we were literally taken from our place of birth with a birth mother who carried us for 9 months. And there have been many studies that show just like how much an infant will pick up the sights, sounds, smells that their birth mother is around. So,
Mhm.
and then you were there until age 2. So that's just
Mhm.
even more. Like, I know you mentioned in the survey that I had you fill out that you had to learn English because you were starting to already
Mhm.
learn Spanish. Did your parents ever talk to you about that at all?
Mhm.
About how they had to, the experience of teaching you English rather than Spanish?
Yes, so I had a really traumatic event, or an experience rather. I took a college Spanish course, and I know for sure that the Spanish teacher expected me to know more than I did. I mean, I literally didn't know anything. I might have known numbers and, some basic nouns, or verbs, but
Mm-hmm.
I struggled, and I ended up having to drop the class, and I never wanted to touch it again. Like, it was just too traumatic. And when I would talk to my mom about it, and even bringing it up now as I'm relearning it, I'm taking courses weekly. One of the things that she says is that I just wasn't interested in it.
Mm.
And, I've heard her say it before, and I just kind of let it go. And then I'm like, no, 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 I have to explain the scenario, because what she feels and what actually happened are two different things. And so, now that she knows that I've connected with my birth family, she knows that I'm trying to communicate with them because they don't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to say, no, mom, I really actually wanted to know Spanish. And, maybe because nobody spoke it at home, that I had no reason to learn it. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, in one sense, I didn't wanna know it, but what was the reason behind it? And she just kind
Yeah.
of, she kinda grew silent, and I wasn't trying to attack her, but that's the truth. Like, that's really what happened. But she did say that I picked up English pretty quickly. She said I was eager to learn it, and she also did say that the nuns at the orphanage told my parents not to speak Spanish to me because they didn't want them to say it wrong. They didn't want them to speak it wrong, but also they kind of wanted me to lose it. They wanted me to kind of move away from that.
Some of the adoption practices just like make me incredibly frustrated.
Yeah, I was kind of, I'm thinking, if your intent is to help these kids, erasing their culture and erasing all that they know, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Mhm.
And it ends up, you know, leaving a lot of scars, as we grow older and are navigating through our journeys.
Mhm. And you mentioned that your experience with your adoptive family was relatively good, right?
Yes.
And I know a lot of adoptees, not all, but a lot do struggle with connections with their adoptive families. So it's kind of nice to hear a story where you do have a good connection with your family. As you started to open up to learning more about your birth
Mhm.
culture and stuff, did you find that put any strain on your relationship with your parents?
They were they spoke, in support when I told them that I was going to be learning Spanish. She kind of, made the comment that she did. And then she said, "Well, we're happy for you, and, we know that you wanna be able to communicate with your birth family." Um, but it was really kind of it's I'm just kind of left up. I'm left to my own, and to be in charge of what I learn and what I know.
Mhm.
I moved out of their house when I was about 20. So it's been quite a while since I haven't been at their house. So a lot of the journey began out of their home.
Mhm.
So they didn't really have too much influence on whether or not I was going to seek. It was just kind of, I am doing this for me.
Yeah.
But they've been supportive when I tell them things. If I don't tell them stuff, they don't genuinely ask. And I think maybe because they don't know what to ask, or I think that they just want to kind of be careful.
Mhm.
So, sometimes when I talk to them and I bring up stuff, I'm kind of a little timid about it, just because it's kind of it's weird, like how do you talk about your other family that you have been so desperately trying to find out and seek.
Yeah.
But as far as the culture goes, no, I talked to my mother about it. She's the one that I typically talk to about this stuff. And she kind of, I think she wants to understand where I'm coming from, but I still don't think that she understands the bigger picture of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's not really much that goes on as far as the culture conversation with them.
Gotcha. I When I first found my birth family, I waited weeks before I told my adoptive family.
Mm,
I was super nervous about breaking the news. Not so much to my dad because my dad's kind of chill with this stuff, but
mhm,
my mom, like,
mm,
she has never been good with discussing anything adoption related without getting into a fight with me about it, and I didn't want to hurt her. And I know that's a
mm,
question that adoptees who do end up searching get often. Like, what did your family feel about it? And it can be incredibly frustrating because as adoptees, I feel like a lot of us often have so much guilt
mhm,
about wanting to search for her birth family in the first place, and that's often like one of the first questions that people who aren't in the adoption community ask us.
mhm, mhm. So true.
um, so when you first found your birth family, did you tell your adoptive family right away, or did you kind of wait a little bit?
Well, you know, they've known that I've tried to search in the past, whether it's trying to connect with the orphanage or, just trying to look for people. It wasn't until 2014 that I actually found my birth mother's name. And I also found that I had a sibling.
Mm-hmm.
So up until then, I knew nothing. I often wondered if I, came into the world by a stork. My mind just was like, it just doesn't make sense. I don't know how I came into this world. And so I think when I found the name, I think it's when it became real to them.
Yeah.
And then this year when it all happened so fast. I had pictured it going so differently. I had pictured going to Ecuador. I had pictured, going to the orphanage and then going through that way, and I never
Mm-hmm.
expected to be able to find somebody to help me on Facebook and then somebody finding her and then connecting me with her.
Yeah.
And so when it happened, m my parents that live here in the US were the first people that I called because I knew that happened in February when I reached out to a specific person, and then I talked to my birth mother for the first time in April. And so at that point, I was still expecting to travel to Ecuador. And so when it happened, I called my parents and I said, "I found her." And they said, "Who? What?" And I said, "My birth mother. I found her. She's in Ecuador and like this is really happening." And they were like, "Wow, this is amazing. Like, what next? What next?" And I'm like, "I don't know. This is just the beginning." And
Mm-hmm.
I told them and then afterwards I got this weird feeling and I was just like, "Man, like I I kind of got the guilty feeling." And I told myself, I
Mm.
said, I'm gonna back off on telling them things right away because the instant guilt would creep up and then
Yeah.
it would make me feel really crappy about what I was doing. And so I told myself, all growing up, people often would, when they noticed, because it was evident that I was adopted and the topic came up, they were always, kind of praising my parents for being these amazing people.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really got to say much. Nobody really said, how is adoption, for you? And so I really decided when I began to search and I had the ability to connect with my birth mother that I decided that I was going to kind of be alone in it and have my
Mm.
husband by my side, and have some close friends that had been with me from kind of the beginning. But I kind of backed away from adopted parents because I didn't want to feel guilty. And I knew that guilty was not like it was normal, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
And so they kind of are the last people to know things, honestly. When something occurs, if I have a conversation with one of my birth siblings, or if I have a conversation with my birth mother or my birth father, I don't tell them right away. Um, I kind of wait so that I can really fully kind of enjoy or take in or, you know,
See how you feel before.
right. Yeah, I don't want any outside influences. I don't want anybody to say anything negative about them. I don't want anybody to say anything negative about what I'm feeling. And so I've kind of been doing this kind of solo, really.
Mm-hmm. I completely understand where you're coming from. When I also went through a Facebook person that I met through an adoption group, and it was kind of a whirlwind. I didn't expect to find my birth mother that quickly. International adoptions are notoriously difficult to find birth family, right?
Yes.
And so like my parents gave me all of my adoption paperwork, so I had my birth mother's ID number and her full name, and I sent that to the investigator, and they found her within like 3 days.
Wow.
And I got that message, that DM on Facebook, and they're like, "Hey, we found your mother." And I was just like, "What?"
Wow.
What do you mean you found her? Like, this is supposed to take months, if not years.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I wasn't ready. I
Mm.
wasn't ready at all. I have some medical problems, so that was kind of the driving force behind searching.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I didn't expect my birth mother to want a relationship with me, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I was unprepared to the weight of what I was actually opening up. Did you find that you were prepared for the type of relationship now that you have with your birth family, or have you been adjusting to it?
Oh gosh. One of my close friends, I was talking to her about it because I hadn't cried. I had not cried since I found her, and I was wondering like what is going on? Why, this is like a very emotional thing and I'm not crying. And I found my birth father who came out of the woodwork. I have multiple siblings, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had spent over 30 years never like desiring to find them, hoping to find them, but I never really thought it would really happen
Mm-hmm.
because, like you said, international adoptions are like you rarely find that I mean, it's just rare. It really is rare that you find that, people have reunions. And so my mind had to really kind of comprehend that this was really happening. And so I was in a lot of denial.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Is this real?" I mean, a couple times I even asked my husband to pinch me because I'm like, "Is this real? Like, this lady exists. Like, she exists. She's talking to me. She has a face. She has a history. She has a story." And yeah, it took quite a bit of time for me to adjust that I had finally found everybody. And it 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 was a miracle, but at the same time, it meant, okay, like you found them, but there's still so much more to this.
Mm-hmm.
And now the unpacking of stories, I have so many questions. And I mean, the process is not over, and it's not going to be over. And so I think a lot of people think, oh, happy reunion, and your hole will be filled, the void will be filled, the puzzle will be found, the puzzle piece will be found. And in reality, it's like we're on another road trip. We're
Yep.
on another part of this road trip, and we have no idea where it's going to take us.
Yeah, you were completely right with that. Like you see in movies and TV all the time, it's just like the happily ever after finding birth family. Now you're just a bigger, happier
Mhm.
family, but it's not that simple. And
Mhm.
I don't want to discourage people from searching, but I do want people to be aware that it's very nuanced and there's a lot of emotions. And before searching, you should really probably get a therapist because
Mhm.
um, have a support group of friends and family, and just make sure you're really ready, because you're not always gonna to find out information that is happy, and it can be
Right.
heartbreaking in a different type of way. Like, I know you mentioned you had other siblings. I found out that I had several other siblings that my birth mother kept, and that was kind of hard for me, because she got remarried a few years after she had
Mhm.
me, and went on to kind of have another family, you know. And that still kind of bothers me. And like,
Mhm.
not like, I'm really happy that she was able to have a family and have other kids, and her husband who takes care of her. But it also, like, as an adoptee, there's that part of me is just like, why wasn't I good enough? Why was I the one sent away, and then you kept those children?
Mhm.
And did you have any of those types of feelings?
Yes. Oh, yes. So, when I mentioned that I found my birth mother, and then she said, "You have a birth father." And I'm thinking, "Okay, tell me about him." And she said, "He lives in America." And I'm
Whoa.
like, "What?" And she told me what state he lived in, and the investigator that I had become, I went and I searched for him, and I found him. And she'd said, like, he knew about you, and he was married at the time.
Mm,
And I'm thinking, "Oh gosh, okay, what a predicament to have been created in." But
mhm,
because I didn't know anything, I think a lot of times adoptees will create scenarios in their heads. So I had already kind of created some crazy scenarios. And then one of them was that, my mother might have been a mistress.
mhm,
And so I found him, and he said, "I didn't know about you." And it was pretty emotional going through that. And then, then hearing her side, and she's like, "No, no, 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 no. He did know." And I'm like, "Okay, I need to know who's telling the truth."
yeah.
And, you know, I had to really, as we keep talking, stuff creeps back up. And so
Mhm,
the feeling of being unwanted, kind of crept back up. And I'm like, "Okay, I am loved, I am amazing." And I'm like saying this mantra that I, told myself. But I still felt like if he knew about me, then he made the decision to not step up.
mhm,
And then if he didn't know about me, then she had to make this crazy decision. Either way, she had to make this selfless decision. And because of their choices, here I am. And I made sure that he knew that I am innocent in all of this. And,
mhm.
I was kind of able to express to him, you know, that yes, people make mistakes, but damn, like, think of the people involved.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's you kind of go back and forth, and you just wonder, like, how deep do I want to go with this? What information do I want to know? And at what point am I going to say, okay, I'm good with the information that I have?
Mhm,
My mother had other children. I have just an older brother, and then it would be me next. So I know that she had hardship, hearing the stories from my birth siblings. I know that she struggled. So sometimes I get the feeling of almost kind of like survival survivors, excuse me, guilt for being over here and
mm.
having the privilege that I do have. And I was trying to put that into words, and I remember saying, I think I have like a guilt for having been given another life, even though I wish that I had stayed with her, and it was just so complicated. And I'm like, these are some weird feelings that I'm feeling. Um, but yeah, the more we learn, the more that we just are kind of trying to take it all in, really.
It's incredibly complicated, and I'm glad that I'm not glad that you had to deal with any of that, but I'm glad that you're able to come on and talk to us about this, because I think it's very important for everyone in the adoption community to understand that. Uh, like I mentioned before, everything's nuanced, and it can be difficult for us as adoptees to see what our birth families situations are. And I think something that we also hear often is that you could have ended up here, your parents gave you a better life, it was for the best.
Mm-hmm.
But it one of the things that I like to reinforce is that we don't necessarily have a better life, we have a different life. And in different countries,
Mm-hmm.
in different places, the standards of living are different, the types of communities are different, and not everything is as materialistic as the United States. And
Mm-hmm.
I think here we put a lot of emphasis on how much money we have and the bigger the house and all the fancy gadgets and all that stuff. But as we can see with like rich kids in the media, having everything under the sun doesn't make a perfect family. and
Mm-hmm.
and just having more materialistic things as an adoptee and an adoptive family, that doesn't make our adoptive families perfect, and it doesn't make it the only option. I feel like there it's been a lot of pressure on birth mothers, and just to say that you can give your child up for adoption and they'll have this perfect life. But even if you come and have a good adoptive family and a good relationship with them, as you did, like we still, as adult adoptees, eventually have to deal with all these feelings and emotions and processes as we get to understand our identity.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, exactly.
Did you find any pressure from your birth mother or birth father to try and come visit? I know it was during a pandemic, but did they mention visiting, and how did you handle that if they did?
I had already planned on trying to go during the summer. This is before meeting them, and I was, like I said, the fantasy had been that I was going to go and I was going to find her then. And it didn't happen. The pandemic happened, and I realized I can't go. Like, as much as I want to go, like, I can't go. And they've actually been pretty good. Like, in Ecuador, it's pretty serious, the pandemic. And so they want me to be safe. And my dad, that's in the US, he's watching the news in Texas, and he's telling me, like, he understands, he wants to see me, but he understands that I can't make it over there.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I was really bummed, like, "Man, I found them and now I can't go and see them." And the more this stuff started to unpack, the more I realized this is actually kind of working into my favor, because I can really digest everything. I can think about it. I can really contemplate what I need from them and what is going to help me heal.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I, neither my mother or my siblings or my father in America knew what happened. They didn't know what happened to me. And when I talked to them about the orphanage, they are like, what happened? We had no idea where you went.
Mm.
So I know they have their own kind of stuff that they're working through, and it's actually the upside, which it's hard to say the upside to the pandemic, but it's actually been really helpful in just allowing me to kind of sit with my emotions and kind of work this out before I go and see them. And it's allowed me to kind of establish kind of these bonds with them. And I talk to my one of my siblings almost daily. I talk to my birth father almost daily. My birth mother, it's a little bit more difficult to communicate with her, just because of the type of phone she has. And
Mhm.
my birth father does speak some English, so I can talk to him. But when I talk to my birth mother, I do have to have a friend translate every conversation. So making sure that aligns up and that she can go and use somebody's phone so that we can talk on the phone, makes it a little bit complicated. But I think everybody is excited to see one another, and I think also everybody is, as far as what it seems, everybody is pretty understanding that this is going to be emotional when I get there,
Mhm.
for them and for myself.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you mentioned about the pandemic kind of giving you a breather, I felt that too because, as I mentioned, I wasn't ready to find them that quickly.
Mm,
I thought there'd be
yes.
more time between deciding to search and then finding them. So, like, after the second, I think it was phone call, my birth mother was asking me, like, "So when are you coming here?" Uh,
Oh, wow, yeah.
and I was like, "What? Whoa, you need to calm down. Like, I just found out that you were still alive and you existed."
Mhm,
I was actually able to see a picture of her, and then that was intense. And just to see like someone
mhm.
who looks like me and share that with my
Yeah.
siblings that were also adopted into a different family, it was just, I don't know, just a lot. And I'm
Mhm,
just glad that you mentioned how good a breather can be to kind of let us sit back and digest all of the information because it's intense and it's it's yeah.
what month, if you don't mind sharing that, what month did you have the reunion?
I searched at the very beginning of March, shortly after my birthday, and then I found her like less than a week after, and that's when we set up a phone call.
Mm,
And yeah, and like you mentioned, I had to use a translator
mhm,
because I don't speak Spanish fluently. I understand a decent amount, but I can't speak it worth
mhm,
a dime. And so that's just been incredibly awkward. And I wasn't ready for as intensive a relationship as she expected right away
mhm.
because I had to kind of adjust to her. She didn't tell her family about all of her children that she gave up for adoption. And so I
Yeah.
was kind of the one chosen that they knew about because they only knew about one. And since I was the first one to find her, that's kind of what it came down to, basically. And so I was kind of dealing with a bunch
Mm,
of emotions because I didn't want to disrupt her family. And then, like you mentioned, the guilt that
mhm,
kind of comes with telling my adoptive family. I had no idea how to break the news to them. And so I kind of just like talked to her that
mhm,
one time and then didn't message her for weeks. And she reached out to the investigator. It was like, "Is she okay?
mm.
Like, where is she?" And then the investigator kind of lectured me. She's like,
Oh,
"This is
wow.
your mother. You need to hire a translator because you don't speak Spanish and just and talk to her." And I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I felt like it was
Mm.
like, on their side, it made a lot of sense, like, the investigator I hired, she was a birth mother herself, so I understood that she was
Yeah.
seeing things from her side, but on the other
Uh,
side, like, as an adoptee, I'm like, "This is a lot to deal with and digest," and this woman has, like, a secret life of adopted
mhm,
children, and I just wasn't ready to be that, intermediary between me and the siblings that, I found in the United States, and just it's just a super complicated thing that I was just kind of looking for medical information, and then I unleashed a can of
right.
worms that hasn't stopped.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
lot.
I feel like adoption stories don't get talked about as often as they should because maybe then adoptees, as we learn and grow as adults, we'd be more prepared.
Mhm,
Like, because I definitely wasn't.
mhm. Yeah, no, I told my husband, because when it all happened, both when I met my birth mother and then met my birth father, I was sitting in a lot of silence, and he would ask, "Are you okay?" And I'm just like, "I'm just wrapping my head around this." And I told him, I said, I was very interested, as a teenager trying to find, just trying to know more information. And at that time, they just technology wasn't, Facebook didn't
Mhm.
exist at that time. And, it just, nobody, there was like no handbook on how to do this.
Mhm.
And so if this had happened when I was 16, I probably would have lost my mind,
Yeah.
because, like I said, nothing prepares you for this. And so when you get older and, you choose like, okay, I want to find this information, but there's just nothing out there. And I'm slowly seeing it now. There's more resources and adoptees are talking more, and sharing their stories. Before it was the adopted parents, and the adopted parents were always
Mhm.
talking about the birth families or whatever. And um, I'm thankful that my parents never did that because I guess because they didn't have a lot of information to go by. I don't know. But I think they just understood that that was just not something to share. But it was really lonely growing up because I didn't know if what I was feeling was normal. And I had to kind of take it upon myself when I ventured in this journey in 2007 that I was going to do this and really nobody really was going to stop me. But hopefully people supported me. But at the same time, I was just going to do whatever I could. And I tried so many different outlets, so many different ways to try and find something. And I always had dead ends. And so now when people talk and you hear adoptees sharing stories, and then you can go in and say, I've been there, I've done that, or you can try this, or have you tried this? Have you looked into this? And we can always, it's just like a beautiful community that's been created that is allowing us to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
empower ourselves.
I think that's essential for us because, as you mentioned, like I didn't know any other adopted kids when I found out about my adoption, and I don't know, I feel like it's about half and half the kids that have been to like culture camps and who have been around adopted uh, other adopted kids, and then the other half, like we've never even met another adoptee until we were an
Hmm.
adult. And the first time I actually met an adoptee in person was just like so refreshing because we had so many similar lines of thinking, and it just felt like a huge weight off my chest having someone who understood some of the things I was going through or had gone through. And so I'm glad you mentioned the adoption community. Do you feel like if you had some of these outlets like Facebook groups or even Instagram community, that it kind of would have helped you more as a
Oh
teen?
gosh, definitely. Definitely. I think it's so necessary to know that you are not alone, because I feel like we often are alone, and we often feel alone, with our thoughts and searching for them, with identity, and our adopted parents are just not going to understand the full extent. And I know a lot of them try to, and a lot of them, get educated, but those of us who were adopted pre like resources, you know, there's a lot of complications with, what, how our parents did things.
Mm-hmm.
And I really have to, whenever I kind of get frustrated with my journey, and I get frustrated, I really try not to get too frustrated with my adopted parents, because I know they try, but at the same time I'm just like, it's almost common sense.
Yeah.
Because I have two kids. I have a 15-year-old and a 7-year-old, and parenting isn't easy, and I don't think I'm a perfect parent, but some stuff I'm just thinking it's kind of common sense.
Yeah.
But I think I've learned that along the way, and that's why I'm able to kind of use that with them. But yeah, the community has definitely given me confidence, and connecting with other, even Ecuadorian adoptees, has really helped me to embrace this journey and know that I am on the right path, although it can be difficult at
Mm-hmm.
times.
I think that's so important. You mentioned being a mom. Has that impacted your journey as an adoptee at all?
Yes, I, I often wonder, if I'm, I always want to make sure that they feel loved, just because I, I can't speak for every
Mm-hmm.
adoptee, but sometimes we get fears of abandonment. And so I always really try and make sure that they understand my love, and that
Mm.
they they know, both my kids know that I'm adopted, and they can tell that I don't look like my parents. And they've seen me on my journey, and they've met my birth family and stuff like that. And so it has really shown me, like I was talking about, like the traditions and the culture, and I'm kind of late to the game, and exposing them to that stuff. But I think they understand. Well, my oldest, mostly, she understands that I'm trying to get into it now, and I'm trying to it's very important to me. It's very important to me to incorporate it. And you know, she seems pretty understanding of finding my identity, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make sure that I encourage them to do the same for themselves.
Yeah, like I totally feel that. My kids are still young. I have a 4 and 3 year old, and I'm trying to learn more about my culture and kind of incorporate that in my day-to-day life. And my husband's actually half Colombian, but
Mm,
his parents didn't really incorporate too much of that growing up. So he's
mhm.
kind of with me. We're both a little lost. So like recently, I bought a Latin American cookbook, and I'm just like, okay, well, food has always been a big part of my life because my adoptive father is a cook. So let me
Mm,
see if I can start that way, because I couldn't touch the language thing as we discussed. So I'm like,
right.
I love food. This will be a little easier. And a lot of the recipes in Latin cuisine, as you probably know, include plátanos. I could
Mhm,
not cut
yes.
a plátano if it like if someone was like holding me with like hostage. They're like, cut this properly. I wouldn't be able to. It took me weeks before I could cut that thing without it coming out looking completely dilapidated. And the first few times I was just like, I am not a Latina. I fail at life. What is wrong with me? And I was so mad. I
Mhm.
gave up on the recipe, but I kept trying. And let me tell you, when those things came out, I took pictures, and I was like, I finally did it.
Yes.
I did it. So
That's
like,
awesome.
I just feel like, I don't know, if you're an adoptee and then you later have kids, it kind of gives us an added push to take chances and to
Yes.
get out of our comfort zone and to kind of push that fear aside, so because we know what it's like not having our culture ingrained into our day-to-day lives, and we don't want our kids to kind of have to deal with that. And I don't want my kids to get teased for not being Latinos enough, or and
Yes.
to be made fun of and calling them a coconut or whatever it is. And um,
Mhm.
I think that's just like an added challenge that adoptees have. Once we have kids, we have to learn how to then teach our own children about their culture that we're not sure
Oh
about.
gosh. Yes, you're kind of learning together and you're like, "Hopefully I'm
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
this right," you know? I actually incorporated 2 traditions about
Hmm.
6 years ago. It was for New Year's Eve, and so we eat the 12 grapes, we eat all of those, and then we also make the Año Viejo, which are like they're kind of like the figurines, not figurines, they you kind of make like a
Uh huh.
doll, life-size doll, and you stuff it and you create it, and so it's supposed to look like you. You're supposed to burn it in the street, and you jump over it, and you kind of like say goodbye to
Oh
the old
wow.
year, your old habits, and everything. Yeah. Now we don't make them life size, and we kind of make it to our own like specifications. Just because if I did that here in my street, I probably would get the cops called on me. So we make little paper ones, and then we write notes on them, and we do burn them in the fire pit. And each year that we do that, I always look forward to it in the new year, because it
Hmm.
does allow me to feel a little bit closer to my culture. And the kids at first they were like, "What are we doing? What is going on?" I'm like, hold on, we're gonna do this." But they know now to look forward to mom, getting that stuff out. And like you were talking about the
Yeah.
baking or the cooking, I'm gonna try and find a book, and I also a lot of the recipes, like you said, have the plantains, and I've tried it in the past and I was not successful. So maybe maybe I'll try and do it now. But yeah, all we can do is try, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. I really love that. That sounds like such a sweet tradition, and it kind of like, encourages me to maybe pick up some more this year. The only thing that we really did is like in Colombia, they open the presents usually at midnight, and
Hmm.
so that's my favorite part because I always hated waiting too. So we've been doing that the past few years. But it's just nice to hear like the journey that another adoptee has been going through, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course.
Now, as a final question, I would like to ask you, well, it's two parts. What advice would you have for other adoptees, and what advice would you have for adoptive parents?
For other adoptees, I would highly encourage you to seek out an adoptee community. If you can seek out a community that best resembles you as an adoptee, um, because adoption is so complex and because there's so many different types of adoptions, if you can find one that, like I said, resembles, like, if, like, for me, a transracial adoptee, I've tried to seek out with them because they are going to kind of have a better understanding of what you're going through, and to just kind of build that community. I've met so many people on Instagram, but a few of them that I talk to
Mhm.
kind of on a regular basis, and they are, transracial adoptees, and we really get a sense of, like, I don't know, a tight-knit community of understanding, and just knowing that you're not alone on this journey and you're not gonna be judged. So, yeah, so find community, and, if you're comfortable, speak your truth, know that this is your story, and if you wanna share it, whether you're writing it down, whether you confide into somebody. Holding in is never helpful. It's very therapeutic to get it off your chest. The more I speak about it, the more I heal, and it has helped me to just be confident, just be a confident person in general. If you decide as an adoptee to find information about your birth family, just know that you can go at your own pace, and that it is up to you what type of relationship you want. It is up to you what boundaries you set, and to make sure that you set them, so that you can really navigate this on your own time.
Mhm.
Just to know that this is your story. I think after hearing people say, like, this is your story and now it's time to flip the script, it gave me confidence in sharing only what I wanted to, maybe, or making sure I speak up more when I hear somebody say something that is not really the narrative as an adoptee.
Mhm.
And a lot of people want to talk for adoptees because maybe they know somebody or they watched a documentary or whatever, but we really should be
Yeah.
telling the stories. And so, yeah, if you find that confidence, or if you find that desire, to make sure
Exactly.
that you can do it and that you're able to do it in a healthy way. As far as adoptive parents go, if you're an adoptive parent, I hope that you listen.
Mhm.
I hope that you listen, and if you have an adult adoptee, when they come to you with things that might have occurred in the past or feelings that they might have had in the past, just make sure you are listening to that, because it's real, and it's real, and it's very important that you understand that, we're not trying to start issues, um, and that we're finally able to see kind of the light, and we're finally able to really see, like, okay, this is how I really felt,
Mhm.
and this is what you should know.
Yeah.
If you have a young adoptee, I would say try and get them in a community. I wish I had had that. I think I was put in, I don't even know what it was. I don't know, but if I recall, it was kind of temporary, and I kind of feel like we were just kind of left to our own devices while the parents were in a separate room. And there
Mhm.
might have been a grown up in the room, but I'm not really talking that highly of it, because it wasn't, it wasn't that, it didn't really, it obviously didn't do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
But definitely incorporate getting around other adoptees, and their adopted parents, and allowing them to grow up with other people that are like them,
Mhm.
and also incorporating their culture. Definitely incorporating their culture, read books. It is important to educate yourself on the culture of your child,
Mhm.
what is going to help them thrive and be their most, their best self as they navigate into adulthood.
Definitely. And just to piggyback off of that and what you said earlier in the interview, even if your adopted child doesn't seem like they're genuinely interested in like learning the language or doing learning about culture traditions or something like that, that's something that you should definitely try more than once to
Mhm.
incorporate into your family and not just give up after one or two times of them complaining. Like
Yep.
teens are going to be teens.
Yes.
We genuinely don't want to do what our
Anything.
parents, yeah, what our parents want us to do. So, as adopted parents, you have that added responsibility
Mhm.
to kind of educate us in that aspect, even when we don't necessarily understand that we should
Mhm.
do
Mhm.
that. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you joined me today. And if you would like to hear more from Adoptee Thoughts, make sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to learn more about me, you can check out my website, adopteethoughts.com. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.